Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. We're really looking forward to having a dynamic and participatory conversation today. So we're glad you're able to join us. We understand a few people will be joining us a little bit later too. So just be aware that the group dynamic might change a little bit. My name's Peter Pula. I'll serve as our lead host today. I've been invited to do so by our good friends at Bisocial Canada. Our time together is planned to be highly participatory. So I've just got a couple of tips for you on that front. One is that there will be some small groups. I'll give some guidance about those small groups a little bit later. But I will say that anything we invite you into is absolutely and purely an invitation. So if it's not for you, that's quite all right. Just hang back. We respect your yes as much as we respect your no. So hopefully we can talk you into jumping into those small groups when the time comes. But doing so will mean that it'll be nice if your name tag actually carries the name by which you would like to be referred when we call on you. So if you have come in on someone else's device or would like to add or change anything in your name tag, you can just hover over your own video screen. You'll see three white dots against a black box. You can click that and then you can get creative with your digital name tag if you'd like. We are going to hold in the gallery view today, but you can also toggle to the speaker view, which might work. We've got a couple of great special guests we'll hear from a little bit later. The conversation will be conversational, so you can control your own experience. If you do want to pin the four speakers, you can do that by finding them when the time comes and hovering over their video and then click pin. If you want to manage the experience you're having your own way, we won't force a certain view on you today. We are recording, something else to know, but we are not recording for the sake of wide public distribution. If someone who was on our invitation and guest list gets in touch and says they'd like to review it, or perhaps if you would like to, we'll share that with others for private viewing. And the reason for that is just that we can maintain open and comfortable space for each of us to explore the questions and sense of possibility to share our thoughts honestly and openly, so we can work together in community and create some great things. The other thing to know is that being able to raise your hand, there are two ways to do that. You can jump up and down, wave your arms, maybe some calisthenics to raise your on-land hand. Maybe we'll catch you. But if you'd like to make sure we catch you, you can raise your online hand at the in the participants button. Is it that where it still is? How long has it been since we've done this? In the reactions button. Oh my gosh, it's like pre-COVID Zoom instructions coming back to Peter Pula today. Post-COVID, the raise hand button is in the reactions button. So if you click reactions, you'll see a place to raise your hand, and you can also play with the emojis and let us know how much fun you're having that way whenever you'd like to. So I think that's what I have for the hospitality notes. Like I said, we will be spending our time in small groups and highly participatory ways of being together. So we look forward to hearing from each of you and having fun in this sandbox we've invited you to play in. So with that, I'll invite David LePage, who's Managing Director of Bisocial Canada, to welcome you well and properly and say a little bit about, we understand from who's here, well, you'll probably know better than me, David, but we might want to just start with some of the basics around what is social procurement and then move into how that relates to games. So over to you for now, David.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And I just want to thank everyone for participating, because this is really us trying to look at new avenues and develop more opportunities for how do we build community. And just a bit of context, for Bisocial Canada and our friends at Toronto Community Benefit Networks and others we work with across the country, we really look at when people purchase things, whether it's government or businesses or nonprofits or individuals, that every purchasing decision actually has a ripple effect. It has a multiplier effect. It has a social impact, a cultural impact, an economic impact, a social impact. So when we think about procurement, we try to think about what can we intentionally do to create community value. So when we started to look at, and this, Peter, this goes back like 20 years now, started to look at social procurement as a tool to create jobs for people facing barriers. We were looking at how do we support social enterprises, and this is like 2002, 2003. We were still learning, like, how do you spell RFP? How do people buy stuff? We were like, how does this actually work? But we figured out that if we only built social enterprises or we only did employment training, we weren't creating jobs and we weren't creating the impact we wanted. We needed to work on the demand side of the market. So we needed to work with the people who were actually spending the money to create the opportunities and get them to target what they were doing. And about that time, as we were really kind of looking at how do you do this, Vancouver started to put together their bid for the 2010 Winter Olympics. And so all of a sudden, all these ambassadors for the bid were coming across the whole area saying, support the bid. And we said, well, what's the Olympics going to do for individuals facing barriers to employment? Or what's it going to do for the downtown East Side residents? Or what is it going to do for community? And they said, well, the Olympics is great for the community. And we said, well, how is it great? They said, well, it has a lot of impact. We said, well, what is the impact? They said, well, we're going to fix the road to Whistler. We said, that's really nice. And we're going to build some community centers. And then we're going to come in on time, on budget, and we're going to win medals. And we're like, isn't there more to it than on time, on budget? And we started to say, what are you going to spend money on? And they started to talk about all the things that would be necessary. And we started to look at what were the opportunities. So things like lots of food and catering and things like the podiums, et cetera. So it was a really fascinating journey of having a really particular timed event around the games and international games of how could we leverage that. And they were talking spending like $5 billion. So we're thinking, if you're spending $5 billion, that's without the sponsors, that's without all the tourists coming. There has to be some value to the community in that process. So we really started to look at, and it was really an interesting leverage for us to learn about when money is spent, how can you direct it to do it? So we started working with some of the Olympic committees, and there were things like one of the big sponsors was Rona, and Rona's contribution to the Olympics was going to be as a lumber company. They would build all the podiums and all the stages. And they wanted to do something with the inner city. So we connected them with a social enterprise training program that trained women in construction. And they spent time, and that group built all the podiums and the stages. And then we got someone who was a commercial florist who knew about a social enterprise training women coming out of prison to be florists. So they bid together on, so all the medal winners at the Olympics had those flowers they got were all made by social enterprises. And funny little things like the lost and found, but it was really a journey of, because the barriers were so, because social just wasn't part of the context, right? It was just that mantra of on time, on budget. And we kept saying, but, and they said, yes, and a legacy. And we said, but let's intentionally do that through what we purchase. So as by Social Canada over the last few years, as we've been working with governments, working with the construction sector, working with, technology groups, everywhere we're learning that all of these opportunities when people spend, like the federal government, $23 billion a year on goods and services. And last year, the federal government said, we're shifting from lowest price to best value. That's huge, right? Working with the tourist industry now, and the tourist industry looking at every time there's an event or games, there's multipliers. How do we maximize? And I think that's our intent today, is start to galvanize or look at, we know these things are coming, and then when we realized in the last few months, everyone watching FIFA and the soccer games, and then we realized, oh, they're coming to Vancouver and Toronto in 2026. We should take advantage of this. And so we thought, let's start this conversation.
Beautiful. Okay. I think that's a great place to start. Thank you, David. Okay, so what we thought we would do is invite you into small groups of 3 to explore with one another this question. And it is simply, why was it important for you to be here today? And the reason we ask that is to just get us all in the room, find our way to intentions and inquiry, and hear from 2 other people. So by way of building a little bit of community and shaping some relational context for our conversation to come. Suggested guidance for that time together, we'll give you 10 minutes to do something that takes 9, in that our suggestion is that each person takes 3 minutes. So if you're able to time for yourself, please do. If not, invite someone else to time for you. The idea is that we can democratize and equalize time and voice by giving each person exactly the same amount of time. It also gives you time to sort of wander around. You might find yourself feeling you have said everything you have to say, but if you're willing to try the funky weirdness of silence and just sit with it for a second, maybe something else will come to mind. So sometimes the silence speaks or brings up new things. So that is also an offer. As a listener, the suggestion is to not help out or even be curious. Just allow a person to find their answer to that question so that they can speak it as fully as it can possibly be spoken within the context of their own feelings and thoughts. So that's the idea. There won't be much time for introductions. We're trying to avoid CV-itis, where we come in as our CVs and our projects and our powers and authorities, but simply to be here as human beings, equal and among each other and all. All right, so that's the guidance we have. So when you land in those small groups, if you choose to go there, maybe a quick introduction, your name, and maybe where you're calling in from, and then decide who will be the first speaker. And the question again is, why was it important for you to be here today? And then as the first speaker winds up, decide who will be the second speaker, hear from them for 3 minutes, and then it won't be too hard to identify who the third speaker will be. So go with the third speaker, and then we'll see you back in the large group. If you find yourself in a group of 2, which I will sometimes refer to as a dyad, you've got 4 minutes each with a minute to debrief the experience. How does that sound? All right. Okay. So the more of you who participate in these smaller groups, the more successful we will be. So that's, I don't mean to force and cajole, but that's the strong invitation. So if you'll see an invitation come up to join a small group, hopefully you'll say yes. If not, you're also welcome to just hang back with me and Yvonne in the main room. All right, so with that said, we'll see you in 9 or 10 minutes. Why was it important for you to be here? Enjoy. Okay, welcome back. So what we like to do following the small groups is just to take a couple of reflections into the whole circle around just from maybe 2 or 3 folks about what struck you about your small group experience just now. We're not so much looking for a report. We certainly aren't necessarily inviting that you speak on someone else's behalf, but if there's something that struck you or that's alive for you now as you return to the large group from the small group, we'd love to hear from you. So if you like, you can wave your on land hand, or you can head on down to the reactions button and press raise hand. And then we'd love to call on you to open your mic and hear from you. What struck you about your opening small group conversation? We've got Paul. If you want to open your mic, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. So yeah, no, to me, I was just struck by the fact that, meeting with people I didn't know from totally different new communities for me, and each of us coming to this meeting with very, very different reasons for being here, or wonderful reasons, but very different. And so yeah, that was just great to see. And I was enjoying that conversation because of that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Guess we'll hear a little bit later about the complexity of the partnerships and relationships that we might find ourselves in. Who else? What struck you about your opening check-in? You'll notice I didn't ask anyone else. That's an easy yes or no question. Who else? Maybe one or two more. We have Chess.
Yeah, so similar to Paul, we all were here for different reasons, but it was nice to find some connection also coming from an Indigenous organization. It's really nice to hear from other organizations on how we can build that representation and work in collaboration together. So that was my takeaway.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And anyone else? Maybe one more.
I don't have an opening thought maybe from our conversation, but maybe just something that is in my mind, which is oftentimes we start to think about our procurement when we have a major event that's sort of upon us, or that's, kind of coming up or is happening where we are. And I think it's lovely to hear when people are just working on being really proactive to set up sort of procurement strategies that we can maintain across the board. So it's not just something that we apply to, major events when it's a necessity, but it's something that can become more of the norm. So I love to, I appreciate being invited, and you'll see in the chat, I can't stay the whole time, and I'm sad about it because I feel like even just this opening conversation was wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa. All right. Okay, well, at this point, I think I'd like to introduce Rosemary Powell. She's with the Toronto Community Benefit Network. We've also have with us today Gwendol Castellan, who's with Destination Vancouver. And so the two of them have hold and are experienced in big parts of this larger picture around social procurement and how it might be related to events and games. And not all events are games, so there are other events we can be in contemplation with, cultural events, for example, while we're having this conversation. But I thought maybe I would start with you, Rosemary, and maybe a reflection on why this is an important conversation to have now in particular.
Thank you, Peter. So I really enjoyed hearing Melissa say, this is not just for the games. Community benefits can apply to all major projects. Whenever we see taxpayer dollars being spent, there is an opportunity to look at it and to see how we can find win-win for our local communities that are being impacted by it, and for people from equity-seeking groups. And so this is how TCBN as an organization and our communities are looking at this really great and exciting opportunity to see that Canada has been selected to host the games in Vancouver and Toronto. That's just an incredible opportunity. Here in Toronto, there will be a $300 million expenditure of taxpayer dollars to help put on the event. And that's just, that doesn't even include all the spin-offs that will come.
And the event you're speaking of, Rosemary, is FIFA,
yes? The FIFA World Cup is coming to Toronto.
Okay. There you go.
is
Right
coming
on.
to Toronto, and it's absolutely exciting. Like, I am not I'm not a sports person. I know nothing about soccer. I know nothing about football. Is it soccer or is it football? But the people around me sure do. And we do have the call with us today, Kumsa Bakar and Gagan Niger, who are also staff of TCBN and who have been hearing from our local communities just about how exciting this opportunity is. And with our experience having developed community benefits agreements on major infrastructure projects that are being heavily subsidized by government funds, we felt, let's listen to our community and let's look at how we can use this as an opportunity to also make sure that the community can benefit from these games.
Right.
And community benefits agreements, really, they are commitments by client owners, general contractors, developers who are, investing in major development or infrastructure projects, and in this occasion, games. And what we do is we look at how can community benefit? How can those people who have been the most marginalized, the most left out of the labor market, and opportunities like this, how can we make sure that there is an intentional approach way in advance of the project being built, where we can say, how do we carve out good jobs and opportunities for people who are from Black and racialized communities, Indigenous communities, women, newcomers, youth, people who are often excluded from these kinds of economic and labor market opportunities.
Right.
And so what we did as soon as we recognized the opportunities, we reached out to City Council and encouraged them to, let's look at how we get a community benefits agreement on these projects. And City Council responded, because we've been working at this now for the last 10 years. With our organization, we have community benefits on several major projects, including the Eglinton Crosstown project, which is an $8.5 billion transit project, the Finch West LRT. We were able to achieve community benefits on the Casino Woodbine project. And there are a number of other community benefits projects that we're working on. And what we've done as a community, as a coalition of community and labor coming together on the platform of community benefits, is to advocate to all orders of government, municipal, provincial, and federal government, to establish policies for community benefits that will make sure that whenever these kinds of initiatives are being considered, that you look intentionally for how everyone can be able to benefit. And so the City of Toronto now has a community benefits framework in place. And with that, we were able to have a conversation. And City Council, we had Joe Mihevik, who is a big supporter of the community benefits movement and who was a councillor at the time. He put forward a motion to City Council, who all approved it unanimously, that the FIFA World Cup games will have a community benefits requirement on it. At the City of Toronto, there's a requirement through their community benefits framework to have a 10% equity hiring target. It would be great to see us be able to go past that, but at the very least, for those people who are Black and racialized and Indigenous, who's been left out of the labor market, let's look at intentional efforts for how we are able to carve out good jobs from these opportunities for them. How do we look at those local businesses, those small mom and pop shops, those women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, who David spoke at the beginning of this conversation. He talked about, what about providing catering and food, event support. You can imagine all the kinds of business opportunities that will be generated from it. How do you make sure that you carve out some specific intentional targets for how these small businesses and social enterprises and minority-owned businesses can actually benefit and get contracts out of these opportunities? How do we make sure that our environmental commitment to zero carbon be, there be some intentional approaches to make sure that we have a game that is that is green.
Right,
Know
and
that
it sounds like you're certainly not starting from scratch in Toronto. Like the work that you've
no.
been doing over the last few years, there's a policy framework, there's political will, you have a community, you have patterns, you have practices. So the next thing, I guess, is we have this massive games coming. And Gwendolyn, in some of our pre-calls conversations, you shared a little bit about what the ethos of games has been. Can you say a little bit about how historically games have shown up and how they behaved and how things end, and perhaps maybe lean into a little bit of how we might like to change that?
Sure, Rosemary. I just want to kind of take that energy that Rosemary's taken and say, like, feel like I think we're going to come together. And I mean, I come from Destination Vancouver, which is a convention and visitor bureau for Vancouver, and historically our sort of business modus operandi has been to find ways to bring events, to bring games, to bring these sporting events to the city as a way of creating economic opportunity for our membership, for industry who will then service those games. And as we would do this, there's various different tools that are at our disposal to model out what is the economic impact of those games, and so we'll use those. And there's some debates as to how you assign the multiplier factor and things like that, but it really was sort of looking at what is the potential economic impact of a game before it's ever happened, in the bid process, in the trying to convince everyone that this is a good idea. And we continue to do this. But I think where being part of this conversation is so exciting to me, and to have this diversity of people that we're really thinking about this from multiple different angles, is that it's no longer good enough to just project what might be the multiplier effect of the economic impact in a destination. We really have to get a little bit more granular about it. And we went through a whole life cycle, being a city that's gone through the Winter Olympic Games in 2010, of thinking through, and David really kind of set the stage when he talked about by socials building a maturity, and that the Vancouver 2010 Games were part of that learning. And then for us, it fits into it's just no longer enough. When we're thinking about not just what we would call mega games of a tremendous complexity, where there are international standards with over 200 different metrics that you can apply to, but we bring that down to major or just regional events that are maybe smaller, but all the pieces can be there. And so as a destination, we've been working to really identify what are the legacies and how we can enable those legacies. And part of it is not just looking at games ahead of time and what is the multiplier effect, but really bringing in more commitments to identifying the areas and committing to measuring and monitoring those through the life cycle of the event. So before and setting those up, but also afterwards, so that we can learn from them. And so one of the we commissioned a report at the Metro Vancouver level, really looking at how and what we might quantify that would allow us to build that capacity going forward, and not have it just come and go through the life cycle of one major event, because that's it's a lot of planning, and then it's 1 week, 2 weeks, and then there's kind of this like done, and people move on to the next thing. And there's I think real importance to carry forward the learnings, the capacities from one major event to another, but also from a major to a modest event that still brings together multiple players in a destination.
Right on. Okay. And you've got a few things going in Vancouver that maybe we'll talk about in our second round. But David, you had some experience with 2010 as well. And maybe you can say something about what that was like, and perhaps what you've learned about the relationship between games and communities from that particular experience.
I think one of the really critical things, and Rosemary and Amy did really the point being is like, it's got to be early on, right? You can't wait till the event happens. It has to be in the planning stage, and the event itself is an event, but like, how do we build those relationships that continue? So when we think about the opportunities that were created for like women in carpentry training, building stages, that's a career path for them after the Olympics. If we think about it as an event that can catalyze a movement or a change, I think that's how we want to look at it. There's such funny reverse economics in these events and games, because when they go out to bid for sponsors, we're used to bidding, and the bidding is the lowest bidder wins the contract. In the games, no, it's the sponsor who will pay the most or do the most. So it's kind of like, how do we leverage the sponsors? And then how do we make sure the sponsors are committed to not just the event, but relationships in community? An example, in the 2010 Olympics, a particular beverage company had the beverages and you had to use all their beverages. Well, an Indigenous vendor didn't want to be affiliated with that vendor. And the Olympics said, no, you have to provide their drinks. And the Indigenous vendor said, well, then I'm not going to participate because I can't endorse that. So when we look at those kinds of, what are we trying to do? And that was one where it was just sponsorship money overriding an inclusive opportunity. But we look on the other side and we see that some of those relationships carry on to today between corporations and social enterprises and employees. So I know, and it's a great point that Rosemary made, it's like, it's much more than the 5 or 10 days of or however long FIFA is, but it's building up to it, the planning, the engagement, and then what happens afterwards.
Right on. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we've been in the hole. We've heard 3 different perspectives on what is, I want to say complex, but I don't mean by that complicated, rich with possibility and opportunity, and clearly practices and frameworks that are in place, as well as a changing environment that could make for new possibilities. So we'll invite you into small groups again. We'll take 9 minutes if you like, and I'm going to break all my rules and double barrel a question here and suggest some contemplation of how what's been shared so far is reinforcing or changing your understanding of the possibilities for games and social procurement, and also what questions are working you, what questions are arising or burbling for you, and we can bring some of those back to our larger group afterwards. How's that sound? Just to give us a chance to hear several voices and reflect on what we've heard. All right, a couple thumbs up. Okay, so invite you to those small groups. We'll keep it relatively informal, but try to be sure that pay attention to hosting one another and see if we can hear from everyone and with as equal time and voice as possible. All right, so I'll give you another 9 minutes. Enjoy, and we'll see you back shortly. And that question is in the chat, and I'll keep you apprised of time as we go. All right, welcome back. Couple of smiles, couple of grimaces. All right, welcome back. So again, we'd love to hear a couple of reflections. What stood out for you? What struck you about that particular conversation? And again, you can wave on land or find that reactions button and raise your online hand. We've got, is it Louis or Louis?
It's Lou, Peter. Thank you.
Lou. Okay. All right.
I was made aware of this quite late by Carl Andrus, who's in Hamilton. I chair the 2030 Commonwealth Games bid efforts in Ontario, and the thing that pops out at me that I'd like to throw out there for consideration is that so much of the dialogue centers on a real traditional approach to the curation of games bids. And one of the things that we in our work here over the last several years have endeavored to do is to look at the extent to which we can take this away from a public sector funded, really non-sustainable from a major games perspective platform to something that involves the private sector leveraging ESG and CSR initiatives upfront. And that changes the value proposition around the curation of games and their benefits. And then the other thing I would throw out there for consideration that you touched on earlier is the question of measures. In our work with the federal and provincial governments, they're all struggling with an appropriate approach to measurement methodologies for impact. And when we talk about economic impacts, first of all, the measurements that tend to happen are input measures, not output measures. So it's how much money are we spending, how many jobs are created, rather than looking at what actually those investments secured or produced. And then there's a hyper focus on the economics of them, but in reality, I think measurement methodologies that take into consideration a much broader cross-section of measures like morbidity, mortality, health and well-being, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion are critical. And we're all working and struggling with a variety of organizations around the world who are pioneering these measurement methodologies to bring them in here, because it's the only way we feel that we can incent private sector corporations who are looking to report on ESG and CSR outputs as a way of incenting their involvement. They need to show to internal corporate stakeholders that their investment in the games beyond sponsorship, right, leads to an outcome that is a important corporate priority.
Okay, thank you, Lou. There's quite a bit in there. Let's hold that intention for now. I just want to make a note here. And it has to do with coming to measures through partnership and coming to those measurements through a collection of activities and organizations. So that's what's coming up for me there a little bit. So I just want to hold that intention, and then hear another couple of reflections from the small groups. Gwendol, what struck you about your small group, or were you jumping in on what Lou had to say?
No, just I really appreciated what Lou had to say. That was really well articulated. Thank you. I just wanted to report just on our group. I think we were really inspired by David's example in our group, and so it raised questions about what are the points in the life cycle of events where there's really those opportunities to influence decision making, and just understanding the whole process and how it might be different for, just understanding who are organizing authorities, who are the bid organizations, and what is the interplay between them, and when are they negotiating, and who's negotiating, where we can really insert that a systematic and structural benefit, so that it's in contracts or in relationships in a way that is not only specific to that event, but also builds a more long-term sustained impact as well. So we were kind of just really kind of
Interesting.
this asking each other questions around that and trying to wrap our heads.
Beautiful. And I imagine that stable organizations like yours and yours, Rosemary, would be the sorts of folks that would have the sort of sense in continuity of when and where those insertion points might show up. Hey, does that make sense? Or am I wandering down a theoretical
No,
path
it
that-
really does. No, it does make sense. And, because we've been there and done that with our community benefit agreements approach, when this opportunity came, we were ready to be able to jump on it, to reach out to, those decision makers who we know were involved, and to be able to, get the first step going, which is to make sure that it becomes a part of our, to make sure to get it as a motion into City Council and, have the motion passed. So now it's on the record.
Right.
And with that, it kind of triggers that process to be able to have that conversation with the key decision makers. And we've already had a first meeting, just an exploratory meeting, to think about what the potential could be. And then now what are going to be the next steps? How do we get ourselves on at that decision-making table with the key players so that we can build out those relationships, because they don't know us. They don't know about community. They're about the events. They're about the games, and we're all about community. So that conversation needs to start happening, and it needs to start happening early. And thankfully, we have a robust system in place to be able to help kind of to kickstart that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And conversations like this obviously are very good. We've got Lou in the room representing a different part of the ecology. So this is wonderful. Any other reflections from the small groups?
Sure. Peter, I just wonder if I can jump in quickly just to ask a follow-up question to Rosemary. So Rosemary, you mentioned community, and we're all from various communities, right? Is there a community organization for communities? So we're all part of that.
Yes, sometimes we talk. I didn't want to. Peter is the one that got me thinking about the idea of civititis. I never heard of that before, but I like it. Sometimes when I go to meetings and webinars, I'm going through the spiel and giving the background of TCBN and my background. But sometimes we just want to dig into the conversation. But sometimes it does help to kind of go back a little bit, right? So yes. Toronto Community Benefits Network is a community labor coalition. We are membership-based. The organization is comprised of over 120 member organizations and groups from across the city of Toronto. So community organizations, labor organizations and groups. We have 12 of the largest unions who are members. So the Carpenters Union, IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the plumbers, operating engineers, sheet metal workers, et cetera, et cetera. And on the community side, we have social enterprises like Building Up, like Eva's Initiative, like, we also are the Afro-Canadian Contractors Association, for example, that is an association themselves of, Black-owned construction businesses are also a part of our network. So we're like a network of networks. And so our entire focus is community benefits.
Yeah, so you have a community of communities in Toronto. Say across the country, what's your sense of the community of communities at that level for those?
That's right. And we're a coalition of coalitions across Ontario and Canada. So for example, the Hamilton Community Benefits Network, who is on the call today, TCBN and the HCBN and 7 other similar community labor coalitions from across Ontario, we meet on a regular basis and we share information, and we've developed a community of practice because we have community benefits coalitions in Ottawa and Hamilton, Toronto, other parts of Ontario. And on top of that, there are other community benefits coalitions and social procurement coalitions like, Buy Social Canada and, other coalitions from across Canada. So we're entirely focused on this concept of, community benefits agreements as a process to be able to mobilize community, all different community. TCBN ourselves, we're a small group of 12 staff now, but 10 years ago, we didn't exist. We have 120 members now. When we started, we had 13. And we're gonna, we're gonna continue to grow this movement and make sure that every major project or event like this will have community benefits on it. It becomes the way of doing business. Community benefits isn't new. It's an approach that's come from the United States. So even within the FIFA World Cup games, many of the stadiums that are going to be used, to run these games in the States for FIFA, they were probably built with a community benefits agreement in LA, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, for example. And I was talking in one of the previous sessions here, one of the small breaking groups, there is someone from Mexico, and there's 3 stadiums over in Mexico. I wonder if there's any of them that had community benefits. And she was asking, maybe I should see if we could probably start a community benefits approach over in Mexico. So community benefits is a process that is tried and proven, and that could be absolutely used to make sure we maximize the benefits that can come out of these, including employment, social procurement, so purchasing from businesses, neighborhood and environmental improvements. We can look at housing, we can look at environmental improvements, we can look at technology. It depends on what those local community groups, and we have a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we always make sure that we do a proper assessment of those who are normally excluded from these process, and we make intentional efforts to bring them into the conversations. Yeah.
Maybe if there are some communities or resources or places where folks could go to be connected with community benefits, communities of practice, or training, that'd be kind of cool to have in chat. So if anyone on the call is able to bring some of those in, that'd be super. I did want to talk to this sort of goes back to what Lou was talking about. Gwendol, you have in Vancouver something called the Sport Hosting Vancouver Partnership that you seem to be somewhat enthusiastic about. So this seems like a little bit different than a community benefit network. Can you say a little bit about how that's come together and the sorts of things you're seeing developing there?
Sure. It was formed in 2015. Kind of, we've gone through the whole Winter Olympic life cycle and legacies, and all of a sudden we're kind of looking back on the Olympics, saying, "Oh, how do we keep our ability to attract events to Vancouver?" And so this coalition, Sport Hosting Vancouver, initially was between Destination Vancouver, the City of Vancouver, BC Pavco, which is the Crown Corporation that owns the Convention Center and BC Place, and UBC, which has large sporting facilities as well. And the idea is to come together both as sort of infrastructure holders, and knowing that any major bid needs the collaboration between those significant players to really on the sort of the bid process. But because it brings together a Crown Corporation and a municipality, the focus isn't just on major events. It's also on building the capacity to bring smaller events, whether it's like a softball tournament that is just a provincial softball tournament. It brings people in the city. It still needs that coalition of groups to work together to be able to enable it to happen. I think as it's evolving, what is interesting is that sort of core capacity to bring together some pooled funds for the bidding process, but also bringing the perspectives. We're at a point of the city does have some capacity now in understanding what community benefit agreements are. How does that come into the events and sporting world?
I was going to ask how prevalent the notion of social procurement is in that group. So this is a Games award-winning effort. And are they thinking as they go about social procurement? Is it embedded yet, or are we on our way?
We're really in the thick of it. We've done 2 bits of research. This is both at Vancouver level and the Metro Vancouver level. One is an opportunity report, and we benchmarked Vancouver to other cities, specifically Auckland, Brisbane, Glasgow, and Copenhagen, which are all kind of cities sort of similar size, but also with a relationship to a larger entity, whether provincial or state, or a national entity. So like Scotland and Glasgow, for example, and looking at that cities on their own, particularly when it comes to sort of larger regional or significant events, can't do this on their own. They need an organized collaboration with that larger. So that was the benchmarking, in that the benefits really need to be articulated at that level. And then the next one was the quantitative analysis. And we really looked at what needs to be measured. And as Lou actually identified, not just the inputs, but really the outputs. What are the legacies that come out of that? And so we're really at that moment of socializing what we've learned in that work, and trying to organize to find ways to embed that.
Okay, all right. And you'd also mentioned that you're working on a guide to social procurement. It's being developed, it's underway. Well, that's got a spark.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
want to say
totally.
something about that then?
Yeah, I mean,
Which
and
I
think,
presume would be available for others to learn from at some point. Should I presume that? Well, I'm going to
yeah,
presume
no,
that.
absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, the intent is, this is so we've done some work with Bisocial Canada around benchmarking what is the state of social procurement and tourism in Vancouver. How are we doing? What is the level of understanding of social procurement across the supply chain in tourism? And so we're about to release that report next month and share that. And one of the outcomes is really this intention to create a guide to really start to move the needle across the board, so that the level of understanding of how to create impact in small, medium, and large enterprises that operate in Vancouver, that they start to understand how to embed that into their corporate processes and into their partnerships even. And so it will be both a document that is sort of germane to Vancouver, in the sense that we'll be referencing things like, who are the social enterprises in Vancouver? What are the so all that is kind of to the Vancouver-based stuff, but then at the core and the sort of the nugget of it is really the conceptual framework, and I think that will be highly portable, and hopefully it's a legacy that we're able to to really provide. I think through Bisocial Canada, who can sort of say, hey, look what Vancouver's done. Maybe this is applicable in other places, and that the framework lands as being hopefully somewhat universal.
Okay, so I have two questions. Like, we have the work that you're doing with this Sport Hosting Vancouver. And do you have relationships with community benefit networks in Vancouver? Is there such a thing? And in reverse to you, Rosemary, have you relationships with, or what's your sense for the coalitions of those who are trying to attract games, and your relationship with them? Like how formative or how developed are these connections between these different parts of the ecology?
I mean, I can answer first because it's quick.
Okay.
I have no relationships yet.
Okay. All right. Okay. So there's room for lots of potential there.
Exactly. The sky's the limit.
Right on. Okay. Good.
Kopsa knows more than me, so he's in the chat. He's on the call. He himself, he worked in the industry.
Okay.
So maybe he'll be able to help pull me along.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, this is good.
I was just going to jump in and say, Rosemary, I think there's a follow-up call between us, and we can learn from each other some more. For Vancouver, one group that's really been such a valuable partner here has been Exchange Inner City, which is a community economic development organization, and with Bisocial Canada have been hosting a social procurement roundtable, which has been a really kind of great process of bringing people together on a regular basis. I think we meet quarterly now, and part of it is in the relationship building. You just don't know. You might know of a social enterprise, but very quickly you can sort of typecast them or think they can only do this because that's what I know they do. But once you have that regular conversation, you hear about what they've done with another organization, you learn that actually they're more adaptable than you imagine, or their capacity and the types of work that they can do is much broader than you imagine. And so it creates that opportunity to think of possibility, as opposed to trying to just fit someone into a box, or they can only do this, or their capacity is limited. And sometimes you learn that they've partnered with 2 other organizations to expand their capacity to meet a much larger contract. And that, I think, only can happen through the slow and steady process of building relationships. And those organizations are really doing yeoman's work, I think, in creating that space.
Well, I like the language of communities of practice and these roundtables to build the relationships over time, because it's the only way we actually find out what's available and what's alive in a community. And I think In some of our other work around social procurement in construction, I know we've had some conversations about engaging community before a build is even planned to discover what it is a community would like. And that brings me sort of back to what you're saying, Lou. I think deciding what the metrics are also something that ought to be done with community rather than to a community. So these kinds of connections between networks and these relationships, it sounds like convening a community of communities around such events for the sake of converting them to some lasting legacy that goes beyond a building, but some social architecture and support. I've heard this, the way it begins is the way it goes.
Yeah, and
So
that was,
begin it well.
Peter, even with the 2010 Olympics, because there was a lot of dissent in community, there wasn't like consensus that this is a great thing. The 2010 Olympics set up what they called an intercity inclusivity committee. We called it the dissenters table. And we
That's an important question. What are your doubts and reservations about what we're doing here? Let's get it on
and
the
what do you
table.
mitigate? How do you mitigate risks and how do you create opportunities?
Mhm.
But we had 17 opportunities identified, which went into the bid. So, to Lou's point of like making sure it's in the bid documents, which then holds the event to those outcomes because they said that was going to happen. So I have to say that planning process, and you start to look at what community is saying could happen, becomes the partnership opportunity, because it's when we sit down together and say, okay, here's what we're going to buy, who can do it. So you take like what Gwendol's saying, is like that, those tables where people explore what are the community, groups. It's like, we don't know all the small Black businesses in Toronto, and surely the big corporate sponsors who are trying to connect with community aren't going to know them. So what's the community connectivity? How do we create those opportunities to identify that? And I think that's the relationship and leveraging, as Rosemary was saying, leveraging the networks that exist, right?
Right on. Yeah.
Not simple, but it intentionality and partnerships. I think that's what that's what I'm hearing, is like, this is about intentionality too.
I also feel that the development over the last few years in networks like the Toronto Community Benefit Network and some of the relationships like the ones you're shaping in Vancouver have developed a community capacity that wasn't there before. So maybe I'll put a last question to you, Rosemary, and Gwendol around what's possible that wasn't possible before. And perhaps even lean into what the best thing that could happen might be. Before you join in that, though, I would like to invite everyone in the room, if you have questions that are still remaining. So what questions do you still have? I'm not saying we're going to get to them, but to name them is a powerful thing, and to have them in the room is a powerful thing. So if you have questions, what questions you still have, would love to have those in the chat. And then we'll hear shortly from Rosemary and Gwendol, and then I'll invite a closing circle where I invite each of you to say what's next for you, what's the next step you're willing to take, if anything, and what you're leaving the call with. So we'll do a quick round of a closing circle that way. Rosemary or Gwendol, voices and images of the future. What's possible now that wasn't possible before, perhaps, just quickly.
Well,
Rosemary?
10 years ago, we didn't have a Toronto Community Benefits Network.
Right.
And this is, an incredible resource that we can really leverage to take advantage of this opportunity. We have 121 members. We have over 16,000 supporters across Canada for our movement. As an organization, we've built capacity. We now have a 12-staff team. So it means that we can put energy and focus and intentional efforts into it, and people can be actually paid to do the work rather than relying on volunteer resources. Oftentimes we go to community and we say, here's this exciting opportunity, we really want you to participate, and they don't. And then you say, well, we tried. But that's because it was set up for failure in the first place. There was no resources allocated to it, right? With this, we have some systems in place now and we have some resources. So what we would love to see happen, like we did with the Eglinton Crosstown project, in which is coming to a conclusion soon, is that we were able to establish a working group comprised of all the key stakeholders that are responsible for making it happen, to bring the dream alive. With the Eglinton Crosstown, we have Infrastructure Ontario at the table. So the government of Ontario was at the table. We had the city of Toronto at the table. We want to see the same thing happen again. We want to see that we had labor at the table. We had community at the table. We had the United Way at the table. We had the individual representation from residents in local communities who were at the table. And with this table set up, we were able to, once the agreement was reached, or when it was time to make the agreement, we had negotiations. And together we were able to come up with a community benefits plan, an implementation plan. I want to see that develop. So it's intentional. There are targets. There is an approach. The partners who need to make it happen, the community resources that need to wrap around and to support and to create those pathways into the opportunities are established and supported and funded to be able to do the work. And then that committee, we met every quarter and as needed to be able to plan and organize and implement, and also to do the tracking, monitoring, and evaluation to see how it's going. Because all good intentions at the beginning, once you start implementing, it's a totally different ball game.
Right.
You know,
so maybe we've got the chance to bring it all home, so to speak. Bring it all home. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And from then we can see how it's going, and then we look at how do we create this as a model going forward for any kind of game, whether it's a large scale or small scale. That's what I would say that we would love to see happen.
Well, we talked a little bit about that in pre-calls too, around no scale is too small. Weekend tournament is a place to start. And some social procurement might be going on, even if people don't know that's what it is. But having the framing might sort of focus their intentions too. So many of us will not be where the Toronto Community Benefits Network is yet. We'll start small, grow tall sort of thing. Gwendol, what's possible now that wasn't possible before, do you suppose?
Well, I just want to start with thanking you to hold this space and just really, I think the just diversity of people who are having this conversation today is super exciting for me. I sometimes feel, that we're, just the tourism bodies talking to each other, or the sport organizations, and I think having this conversation and I know I've invited people from my professional environment to be here, and who really responded positively. And so I think that is something that needs to continue and grow. One of the recommendations that we've heard is really also building the library, so we're transparent about how things have happened with the events that have gone through. And maybe this is a national conversation that we're having today, which is super exciting to me. And maybe that library of reporting on events is one that we don't just hold in our little fiefdoms and part of the world, but it's one where we commit to, for Vancouver, we have FIFA, we have the Grey Cup coming up, Invictus, Laver Cup. These are all major events, and there will be others. I'm thinking by 2030, wouldn't it be amazing if we're able to really not just look at what were the numbers we said these events would bring us, but what actually happened, what were the outcomes, how did we commit to following through, and learn from them, and allow new events to look to what's come before in an accessible way. You don't have to go looking in 10 different locations to try and get a report that people have held really tightly.
Well, reports are nice. We should have some stories too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Gwendol. Thank you. All right, with that, we've got 3 minutes. So I'll ask really quickly. We'll do a round. And I think, Yvonne, have you got something for us near the end? Dave, is there anything you want to say before I open a quick closing circle?
No, just thanks, everybody. I think this is an initial step into a very long and vibrant conversation.
Here, here. All right. So the question I have for you, if you are willing, is what are you leaving with? And possibly, if you have a next step, what is it? So if you want to get out of here on time, you'll have to do it quickly. But I'll call on you anyway. If you'd rather not say, just put your hand up and I'll call on whoever's next. So Liz, I'm going to start with you because you're familiar with the process. So if you are willing, we'd love to hear from you.
I'm leaving with some great new connections. And I think, to echo what David said, this feels like the beginning of a number of really exciting conversations. So I'm looking forward to following up with folks after this.
All right. Thank you. Let's go to Rosemary, Gwendol, and then Katie, if you'd like. Rosemary?
It was a good session, and I met some really good people that I know that I want to connect with after this. And so, yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. It's the start of a really great conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gwendol and Katie, then Neve, if you'd like. Gwendol.
Well, very quickly, I think I'm going to go back to my colleagues, to people where I'm having conversations around events, and tell them about the conversation we had here and who was in the room, and try and really sort of bring that hope that that there's all these groups that are willing to have these conversations, and there's a tremendous potential.
Right on. Okay, thank you. Katie, if you'd like.
I'll just read what I wrote down because
Okay.
it's easier for me. I learned a significant moment to pay attention to and act on during the procurement process, which is when the organizing authority decides on sponsors, and something that a community benefits network would do would try to ensure that sponsors include the community in their negotiables and that they don't override the community. And the next step for me is building capacity with our network. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Neve, Lynn, and Spencer, if you'd like.
I posted in the chat, I'm leaving with new connections. It was great chatting with some people from HCBN in our breakout rooms and hearing what's going on over there, and also inspired by all the lively discussion.
All right, thank you. Lynn, Spencer, then SE, if you'd like. Lynn?
Well, I'd like to thank Bisocial folks for having this, and for you facilitating as well, Peter. It always meet new people, get new ideas, perspectives, and get revved up, which is really important as I age. So thanks again, and terrific to see you all, folks.
All right, thank you. Spencer, if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll be taking away some learning, some different perspectives, expanding, how social procurement can really push against some of the, expanding it to tell the story of what these events can bring, and move away from some of the outsides of what the large scale events can do as well. And great session.
All right, thank you, Spencer. And SE, if we have you. And if not, we'll go to Chess and then Mohammed, if you'd like. Chess.
Hi there. So I'm new to my role, and what I'm taking away from this session is definitely how our current policies and bid applications connecting with the community and also fostering that social enterprise. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Mohammed, Paul, and Kumza, if you'd like. Mohammed.
Yes, hi. So yes, I'm also new at my role as community engagement coordinator with HCBN. I think one of the things I'm thinking of right now is, and kind of a takeaway beyond the, great connections and great conversation is, kind of how to foster a culture that supports, this type of framework for community benefits and social procurement in the future, and not just have this, our efforts end at one event or one project.
Right.
Yeah. So definitely gonna, have to ponder that a lot more, and hope that this is going to be a continuing conversation in the future.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you. Paul and then Kumsa. Paul.
Yeah, for me, it's just we have the Toronto. Sorry, apologies. So we have the Toronto Community Benefits Roundtable, and I feel like that is going to be a hugely important vehicle for bringing the Toronto GTA social enterprises together to run. And this can be a real, I think the games can be a real focus of that over the next while.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you. And Kumza, if you'd like, if we have you.
Hi.
We got Kumza, maybe not. Going once, twice. Bidding is closed. All right, with that, Yvonne has a graphic reflection drawn live from our conversation today. So we'll invite a short look at that.
I will have to spotlight it because I didn't quite
There
get
we
it
go.
scanned yet. But this is
All right. Very fun. All right. Thank you, Yvonne. Wonderful as always.
That is brilliant.
Thank you.
We're gonna have to post this all over our social media right now.
I would be honored if you did. Yeah. Thank you.
That's a smashing idea. All right. So with that, we are closed for the moment. I imagine there'll be some follow-up sends and so on and so forth. So I'll invite the big goodbye. I'll count from 3 to 1. When I land on 1, the invitation is for you to each open up your microphone and bid each other adieu in whichever way suits you. All right. In 3, 2, and 1. Farewell and be well, friends. Until next time.
Bye. Thank you. Merci.